Sean McGorty, the king of comebacks. Welcome back to the Running Effect podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. Happy to be back on the podcast. I was trying to think. I don't know if is it almost coming up on like 3 to 4 years, I think, since the first time I was on. So we've had plenty of
Dude,
conversations.
many conversations, always blessed by them. I think the OG conversation you can't even find if you tried because it was originally only on YouTube. And then when we transitioned to Spotify, I don't think I brought all those episodes over. So real ones, remember like episode 21 with Sean McGorty. You cannot find it exclusive. You can't pay me enough money to release that one because I don't know if I have the ability to. Sean, though, in those conversations, I may have asked you this question, but as you said 3 or 4 years ago, I don't trust my memory that well enough. And again, new listeners today, so I think it's worth revisiting. We're recording this final day of September. That screams cross season. You were a legend. You were a stud back in high school in Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. Take me through some fun cross stories when you think to this time of year.
I mean, high school cross country was just, especially my junior and senior year, was just so much fun. I think iconic races for me would be, I forget the name, is kind of ironic since I just said it was iconic, but I think it maybe is the state course, or it used to be the state course in Maryland, but it had what they called like the dip, and you would just bomb downhill, and then you have like flat for maybe like 10 meters, and then you had a bomb immediately uphill, and you had to do it both ways. And one of the ways, there was trees coming down, and they literally put like mattresses on these trees so kids wouldn't like tumble down the hill and smack into these trees. And that course was brutal. It might have been called, the name might have just come to me, Hereford. I don't know if I'm saying that right or if I just made something up, but that race in Maryland was pretty iconic. And then I'm out in North Carolina right now, so when I'm back at Wake Med, it just makes me think of, I don't know if the meet's still called Great American, but that was a pretty just important race for me, big race for me. My senior year, Jacob Thompson and I had a battle literally to the line. I think I ended up winning by like a fraction of a second, and that was a huge victory and gave me a lot of confidence to set me up to, win Foot Locker South, and then ended up being runner up to Ches at Foot Locker. So my cross country, especially on the East Coast, fall vibes, I love it.
High school cross country is the epitome of team, and anyone listening, I'm sure, will fully agree with that. You then went on to Stanford, which we've discussed at length in previous conversations, where it was like, I mean, I'll give Stanford cross country 2024 their flowers, but like the McGorty, Milt era, Fisher era was something else. It was special. And now you're obviously a pro at Bowerman. I'm curious to hear about, in 2024, what are some ways you try to emulate situations that are almost impossible to emulate of that team environment in high school and college? A lot of people struggle to bring that to the professional world. I feel like Bowerman has done a really good job of doing that. Can you speak to that aspect of still trying to have that team aspect in a very now individualistic sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think to truly mimic it, like you said, is probably impossible. Just on the pro level, there aren't any races besides maybe World Cross where, team score really comes into things. And, that being said, I feel very fortunate that at Bowerman there is, there's still a team aspect. And I think we do a fantastic job of supporting each other, since we are all on the same team. I think, situations can be a little different when you're lining up at a U.S. championship or Olympic trials. And there have been times where there's been five of us in a race for three spots. So, at some point you're battling against your teammates, but from a day in, day out perspective, it feels just like it did in high school and college. And that's something I really love and value, is training with people that I think make me better and create an environment that I feel motivated, and can feel, passionate about running. And then we kind of channel our old schools during the cross country season. There's usually a good amount of banter back and forth, and watching the NCAA cross country national championship is always something we make sure, if long runs that day, it's definitely pushed back so everyone can watch, and it gives us a great discussion for the next 90 minutes to 2 hours on that day. So there's a lot of love and pride for the schools we went to, the coaches we ran for. and that definitely carries over as well.
Milt being your college coach and now still being incredibly close to him, I know you'll visit the team. It seems like every year, at least when I've talked to him, he'll bring
Yeah.
up you visiting the team, talking to the team. Would we ever see you in Tar Heel gear? And is that like your number two now, or is it just like Stanford number one, no bias towards anyone else?
I mean, my teammates would give me a hard time because I think in during basketball season, I think Stanford and UNC were playing, and they asked me who I wanted to win, and I said UNC. But
Wow.
and Mo was giving me a hard time about no loyalty, and some people might say there's no loyalty there, but I think for those that don't know, I grew up a UNC fan because both my parents were on the track and field team there, and so I've always grown up. I mean, my room was Carolina blue. I'd have UNC pillows on my bed. I think it was like I don't know, some birthday in the single digits. I got a CD for my birthday where like it was customized, where I was the one making the game winning shot for UNC basketball. And it was like the CD you could play, and it was against Duke. And it was just like the greatest thing ever. I wish I still had it. But so UNC's always had a special place in my heart. And I always thought I would go there. But obviously went to Stanford with Milt, and so when Milt came to UNC, I think I naturally started to root for his success, kind of follow the team. Like you kind of mentioned, from visiting him, I've gotten to know the guys on the team, and really have enjoyed running with them, getting to spend some time with them when I'm in the off season on the East Coast. And I think the first ACC battle with Stanford and UNC is going to be a good one. I am pretty intrigued because Stanford has to travel to the East Coast. It could still be a little humid in October, and I know from Milt the UNC guys are fired up. So it should be a good battle, and I think it's definitely more of it's a 1-2 in my heart instead of just Stanford all the way. I think I'll always be grateful for Milt and everything he did for me, and I'm definitely given a hard time for my teammates though for not having more Stanford loyalty.
From having Parker on the podcast multiple times now and knowing him, also Ethan Strand, and then obviously knowing how Milt coaches, he seems to coach his guys pretty similarly to how he did back in Stanford. Obviously, he's grown and evolved as a coach and changed a few things, but at least on paper, it's factual. Milt knows how to transition guys from college to pro and leave something untouched for the pro world. As you see a guy like Parker Wolf get top 3 at USA's, how scary is that as a professional runner, but also as someone who knows the program, to be like, this guy's on another level, and I know Milt and what he's done, and there's probably a lot more that's untapped.
Oh yeah, I mean, first off, that performance was incredible, and I was rooting for him that the rankings would go his way and he'd be able to, have that spot at the Olympics. But Graham did a fantastic job as well, making the final, and I think placing 10th,
Ninth, I
8th,
think.
ninth, somewhere in there.
8th, ninth, or 10th, we'll take it.
Yeah, and but I mean that like the composure because I remember going back to when I ran the Olympic trials in 2016. I was a runner-up in the NCAA 5K, and I remember getting to the Olympic trials final, and I was incredibly nervous and just did not run with the same confidence I had in college. So I think one of the things that really impressed me with Parker in that race is the composure to run within himself and with the same confidence he had just finished, with at the NCAA 5K when he won. And so that was, I think it's very impressive just to, no matter who's in the field, still have that same confidence and still run with that same level of composure. I think that's definitely something that Milt probably helped him foster, but also it's just probably innate to who he is. But I think if you look at both Parker and Ethan, they continued to run well after, they ran well at NCAAs, but continued to run well at the Olympic trials. Obviously, Parker getting third, Ethan making the 1500 meter final. And I don't know, Milt felt like he did this at Stanford. I think he's clearly doing it at UNC. He always had us ready when we needed to be at our very best in outdoor track. And, cross country would be a focus. And then in indoors, we were still training hard. But I think, not that he would leave some things on the table, but I think he knew the indoor season was not the most important time of the year. And I just felt like he knew how to have us build. And I know that he would stress over it and probably overthink it some, but he's always able to kind of piece it together right. And I mean, if you look at it for Parker to beat Nico, um, that outdoor race, I don't know how many times either of them win if you rerun it like 10 times, but to be ready on the day, like that didn't surprise me at all because one, I really believe in Parker, and you could kind of see it with some of his races throughout the year that he was capable of putting it all together when it needed to happen. But I just think Milt does a fantastic job in preparing you to be at your best, and so that was, I mean, myself, the guys, when we were watching, we were all going crazy for him and Milt, and that was that was a super fun moment at altitude camp. So I would definitely say I was full on UNC pride at that moment, and slash Milt pride.
As a guy who's coming up on the sport and I feel like becoming a veteran, both in age and also what you've accomplished, not to make you feel old here, but like first time I had you on the podcast, you were definitely like newer to the sport, more wide-eyed. Now you've made a couple teams, you've done a lot of things. College was a little while ago. I'm curious, as someone who's a veteran in the sport, what's your take on NIL? And do you ever go back and wish that it was a thing when you were back in the day and made a bag? Or are you grateful, on the contrary, that you didn't have that extra distraction?
It's just the landscape in general feels a little crazy at some points to me. And so from that standpoint, I'm definitely not jealous. Um, I'm not like someone that's like, oh, like we ran in there was a sense of purity when we were in the NCAA because there wasn't NIL and, the transfer portal wasn't what it was and people were moving around so much. I'm definitely not like that. I think I'm grateful that, while we were there, we kind of knew who was going to be on our team. We had the occasional grad transfer, but for the most part, it was the guys Milt was recruiting, and that was what we had, and that was who we were going to make it work with. And I think from a team culture standpoint, that's probably easier. I'm definitely not jealous of, I think maybe you see it more with like basketball or like football, but I think it's got to be hard for a coach to create a new team culture if you have like 50% of a new team every single year. I think for cross country and track and field specifically, it's probably nice for athletes that if their coach leaves, it's a little easier to follow the coach if you want to. I think while I was in college, there were a few times that Milt was approached by other schools, and I remember like thinking, I was like, okay, if he had left, what would I have done? Now I think it's a little easier, but as far as the making money, I think I'm happy for people that are able to, but I don't necessarily feel like I was missing out. I think it's maybe starting to get like a little out of control, so we'll see if they kind of pull the reins and try and course correct. But I also think once the floodgates are open, it's kind of hard to like, once someone's making money, I don't know why they're going to be like, well, why do I want to stop making money? So it'll be interesting to see how things play out. I think the different things you hear specific to our, we'll just say, because it's the fall cross country, I'm not jealous of this time in the NCAA because I think it's just different dynamics at play than I had to deal with or the coaches had to deal with when I was in the NCAA.
I do think, and you alluded to this, it's way crazier in other sports than running. Running kind of has always stood out as the wholesome sport, and it has maintained that reputation even in this regard. I think in football, Ohio State has over 20 players on their roster that reportedly make over $1 million a year just from boosters and all that. And it's like, I don't know if you guys are playing for the love of the game anymore. Like, I'm sure some of them are, and then you also get in those conversations where Marvin Harrison Jr., best wide receiver in the league last year, or not league, NCAA. And people can debate me on that all day. I will willingly engage in that debate. He had one more year of eligibility, never beat Michigan, and there was a conversation of like boosters through donors paying him like $5 million a year to return. And it's like, it's a little out of hand. But I mean, it goes to the conversation, like if we're using Phil Knight as an example, if Oregon comes close to winning in cross and like someone becomes the next Ed Cheserek and it's going pro or staying one more year in the NCAA, like if you have the money and you can do it now, why wouldn't you
Yeah.
pay to see your team win a title? I don't know. It's very on the gray line of like,
Yeah.
what do you do?
I mean, things used to be done behind closed doors, to pay people. So I think, was I surprised like how much money was thrown into it as soon as it was like made public? Like absolutely, but and it does kind of feed into the fact that like if your school has more money, you're able to pay the best players to come and be a part of your program. So there is like interesting, power dynamics there, but I think for some athletes, like whatever the sport, and football, if you go pro, how long is your career going to be? If you don't go pro, like, but you can still make hundreds of thousands of dollars in college, like that could set up you, can help your family, things like that. So if you are bringing in that revenue for the school, part of me is like, why can't you get a piece of it? I think this was back in high. I mean, this was so before like all this back in high school. I think the debate was still going on. Should you pay players? And I think I had in my like school essay argued, what if you were paying them, but you only like got the money if you graduated? Obviously, like something like that wouldn't happen at this point in time, especially if you're a basketball player that can go pro after 1 year. A football player, you got to wait until after your junior year. I don't know. I'm sure there'll be, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm sure there's going to be a pullback in some way, or people will try and regulate it some. But if you're an Ohio State fan, you probably benefit from it. So it's just all very interesting would be the word I would use.
I would say we need to transfer some of that money to the cross country and track and field teams, but you didn't hear me say that.
Good luck.
Not
Good luck.
Yeah, not just football. Okay, let's talk about reflecting on the 2024 season some. This has kind of become an annual tradition at this point where you sit down with me after your season, break down some of the insights. We did this at the end of last year, hence why we're not really talking about your 2023 season or before. Knocked down my mic. 2023 season or before then, and people can go listen to that episode. That was a fantastic episode. First question here to start things off, kind of two-parter. One, why do you think it's important to reflect postseason? And two, what does that process look like for you in terms of sitting down and reflecting on the key points? What are those key points, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was funny because as soon as you and I were texting and you were like, do you want to kind of review the season? After responding, yes, like that'd be awesome, I immediately started to reflect. So you kind of got that process started for me. It had kind of happened a little earlier just because I was still in season, but watching the Olympics, there was definitely some reflection there. And just back to your question, I think for me, it's always felt important to reflect on, what worked, what didn't work, and then what do I want to change moving forward. And I think it's not always so simple, but can I like boil down the year to, one lesson learned basically, or it's like, what's the one thing I want to focus on moving forward? And, we'll get more into it, but I think from watching the Olympics and then finishing the season, my one probably takeaway for next year was work smarter, not harder. And that's rooted in like my own bias to probably overwork, and some of that's like injury prevention, which I'm sure we'll talk about in more detail. But like, I think the reflection piece is valuable because I think sometimes when we're in the moment, we don't always give ourselves enough credit. So I think some of it can be appreciating the work that you put in and realizing how you can build off that in the future. I think with a little more time, it's easier to reflect on the things that didn't go your way with a little less emotion, heat of the moment. And then, just, I think one of the things, and I've probably said this on your podcast before, but that I love about running is kind of this through competition, the pursuit of like your best self or best version on that day and things like that. And so along those lines, I think reflecting on the year it's just kind of an easy checkpoint of like, okay, like, what worked, what didn't work, and how can I continue to pursue that best version of myself moving forward.
We'll talk about the injury and what led into the trials this year and maybe the more unideal circumstance. But in 2022, you made the 10K team. I think that was Eugene. And then the following year, last year, 2023, you made the World Championship team, and not just the 10K, but also the 5K to send yourself to Budapest, Hungary to race at the World Championships representing the US. So back-to-back years making the world team. I know you and your level of expectation for yourself. Even if you hadn't made those teams, I think you probably would have put an expectation on yourself to make the Olympics.
Hmm.
What was that process like of ultimately not making the Olympic team? And was it difficult at all to watch the games this year, knowing in your head that, if the pieces lined up, you are a guy that can make it on paper?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the first part of your question, I think in some ways, and I actually was able to kind of think about this early on in the moment, that in 2021, when I didn't make it, I think I really, it wasn't even like I was really sad not to make it, but I think there was just a lot, like the biggest emotion was just like kind of the frustration and disappointment with myself that I felt like I basically got in my own way from the mental side of things. And um through all that, started to work with the sports psych in 22. And even though I ended up getting sixth on the day, I really walked away being like, I really, there, that was the best I had on the day. There really wasn't anything I would have changed. I felt like, if we're replaying the race, I think very early on I'd positioned myself like right behind Cole when he was leading early on, and then Woody makes that incredibly strong move, gaps the field, and it's kind of a little bit of that cat and mouse of like who's going to be the one to like close the gap. Obviously Grant was like, okay, this is getting like, I personally was like, I'm not going to be the one, but so Grant, makes a move to close the gap. I just moved right onto his shoulder. We catch up to Woody. I think the pace eases a little bit. Abdi goes to the lead. I think I either went right behind Abdi or right behind Grant. So I was always like positioning myself where I wanted to be and racing with the kind of aura, like, or just putting yourself like where you want to be in the race. And then, Grant makes his decisive move that ends up, winning him the race with Abdi right on him. And, they gap us. And, that's a hard move to kind of like react to emotionally when you can't cover it. But I felt like I was able to stay focused on that second pack, that had Parker, Dylan, and Graham. And, I really felt like I fought as hard as I could that entire last 1200. I did not have the gears that Parker had, not remotely close at the end. And then, I wasn't able to hold on to Graham or Dylan. But I just feel like I finished being like that was the best I had on that day. I really honestly think the prelim was still in my legs. The race didn't feel great, and I think that was just kind of a function of, like you said, we'll talk about that missed time. And I just think that after the prelim, though, I was like, I feel like that was the best I had on that day, especially with how that race played out. And I wasn't in a position physically where I was like, I'm going to determine how this race plays out. So I can kind of only react and race with what's happening around me. And, it still stings, and it still was hard to watch the Olympics when you're like, not that you like, you make each team and you know how hard it is. And you're just like, well, I know I'm like capable of making teams. And so it's just hard when you don't make one that has a lot more weight put on it from like the outside world, and even like in the track world. So, that piece is hard, but, watching Grant and Mo in the 10K, like that was just like, well, it was a whirlwind of emotions too. Cause like Grant medals, Mo misses out. So that was like it's just like an emotional, like event. I don't know, just like watching, like, I just love watching track and field. And I feel like the Olympics just did not disappoint. Like they were just fantastic performances across the board, world records. And just, I think seeing teammates and like, former teammates perform really well, like just from an emotional sense, like Grant's double medal. I mean, that was just incredible, especially the 5K, because watching, Jakob, like, or Gebrevet made his move, Jakob's closing it with 400 to go. I'm watching Grant and I'm like, okay, like maybe the 10K is just still in his legs. Makes sense, totally understandable, but just like the composure for him to just go through his own gears and like the entire way that last 100 just keep closing and get third. So it's like a whirlwind of emotions, not to keep reusing that word, but then also I think made me reflective of like, okay, like in 4 years, like the next 4 years, you obviously want to be in LA, but then throughout those next 4 years, what are other things you want to accomplish? And I think that just led to some great reflection as well. And um, yeah, sorry, this is a long-winded answer, but I think what was special, I wish it wasn't from not making the team, but I think what was special in my like reflection is I was like, okay, you've grown a lot since the 2021 Olympic trials, that you're able to know that and reflect and be honest with yourself and be like, okay, that was the best I had. Like, does it make it any better that I didn't make the team? Absolutely not. But there's a certain level of peace with that. And I did not have that peace in 2021. And so, personally, for me, I really value that growth. And it kind of was exposed through, for lack of a better word, experiencing the same like failure, but I really can't say it was from like an outcome standpoint. I guess it was a failure, but from a execution standpoint, there's not anything I would have changed.
You just spoke to that extensively in your response, the aspect of still being proud of yourself because of how you executed. And you said earlier on in your response there, knowing you raced your best race and gave it all on the day, and the result was the result. I think that's a mindset that comes with maturity in the sport, and high school and college kids just are not mature enough to realize. They might actually have the race of their life and execute really well and dig deeper than they ever had before and miss a PR by 3 seconds or miss their state meet. And the whole effort goes unnoticed because
Mm-hmm.
they didn't accomplish the paper goal, the goal on paper. Could you give some advice to the listener who's in that boat of giving yourself flowers even when the result wasn't necessarily in line with what you wanted to achieve going into it? And also why it's important to set the goals that you do have full control over. Like, you always can control how you execute a race. You always can
Mm-hmm.
control your effort. You can't control what the other 200 people on the start line are going to do if you're
Yeah.
racing cross.
Well, I mean, I very much understand and resonate with, especially in high school, being tied to outcome goals. I think it wasn't like until my junior or senior year, but I started making like specific goals for each season, and I'd have it like on my bulletin board in my room, and every single one is outcome based. So, you maybe you hit the outcome, but it wasn't your still wasn't your best on the day. And then there's other times where you missed the outcome, but that was absolutely your best on the day. And I think like it can be very hard to kind of remove the emotion tied to that outcome. And I think so one thing that's helpful is, being able to talk about it with other people that can kind of pull you out of your head because they're not you. Maybe it's parents, coaches, friends, teammates, sports psych. It's like they're still emotionally invested, but they're not like as tied to it as you. So it's a little easier for them to bring some perspective, which I think we're not always the best at adding for ourselves. So I think, it took me a while to learn that. And part of the reason I was able to then like add some of those new goals was when I went to Stanford, I had talked with Coach Mild about like maybe the fact that I like setting goals, or these were going to be my goals for the season. And he wanted me to add in at least one or two goals that were not tied to outcome. So those were just goals that, I could reflect on and be subjective on, but like there was no like way to like, besides kind of me reflecting. And I think a big one was like run for Stanford, which like sounds like you're like, oh, well, if you put on the jersey, you're running for Stanford. But it meant more of like, how are you carrying yourself and are you running for your team instead of like the outcome goal you have? And that was just one that immediately comes to my head. And so I think those goals are really valuable because, like you said, I mean, especially like at the Olympics, right? Or just the highest level of sport, you can have your absolute best day and so can someone else. And it might mean that you miss out on a medal, but that doesn't take away from the fact that at the Olympics, you ran your very best. I think it can all just get very clouded when obviously medals are going to be celebrated. They should be celebrated. But like, I think there are many metrics of success, and I don't see the non-outcome goals as a way to give yourself like a participation medal. Um, I just see it more as a way to be like, I think there's different ways to keep building momentum. And I think especially honestly this year, if I had left the trials and hadn't made the team and hadn't been like pleased with how I like had executed my race, that none of the, race experiences I was able to have the rest of the summer, the PBs I was able to run would have happened. Because I think only by like having that piece was I immediately able to go back into racing and be excited for what opportunities were there and be like, okay, like I'm actually like really happy with how I raced, especially having not raced before this and being like probably a little rusty tactically. So I think when you're in high school and college, it's again super, and as a pro, it's still easy to get focused on these outcome goals. I just think the reflection piece and just kind of the younger you are, the better, like when you start developing it, but getting a gauge on just like what effort did I put into that? And when it got hard, like, did I embrace that or did I kind of shrink from that? And you know, I think a huge part of that has just, for me, has been in conversations with my sports psych. And it's like, I don't know. Personally, I don't think we're very good at like lying to ourselves normally. So I think like if you just start listening to the conversations in your head or just kind of like reflect on them, you usually get a good sense of like, okay, what went into the performance that just happened.
Simple question, but I think somewhat deep. And I'm curious to hear your response on it. But you see a sports psych, and you're a deep, profound guy. So, just curious to get your opinion on this. Why do you think, as humans, specifically athletes, type A, high achievers, which is majority of the running community, so majority of people listening, why do you think,
Mm-hmm.
as humans, we're so hard on ourselves?
It's a deep question for me to answer right off the cuff. I mean, part of me is pausing because like I definitely have been extremely hard on myself in the past, and I don't know if like we always want to believe we're capable of accomplishing more, because I think so going back to high school, I think sometimes in high school I'd have teammates who I feel like would almost like kind of like build in excuses. So then if the performance doesn't go your way, it's like, well, like, oh, like I know that wasn't like the best I had. Because I think one of the hardest things is being like, oh, that was the best I had and I did not accomplish like what I wanted. Like that's like
I
pretty
slept
brutal.
6 hours last night, bro. I don't know how this
Yeah.
morning's gonna go.
So like I think going like knowing you did like everything you could and going like fully all in and then like not accomplishing what you wanted to do is like that's hard to sit with. And so um I don't know if then we like kind of create these like buffers or kind of built in excuses because that's a little easier to deal with mentally. That's slightly different from your question though, of why are we so hard on ourselves? I don't know. I think the pursuit of our best can get clouded with the pursuit of perfection. And I think that
Dang.
those are
Talk to
not
me.
the same. They're not the same thing, obviously. And I think just like I don't know. Sometimes you just have to give yourself a little grace and be like, I'm human. And like, I don't know. I mean, I've definitely struggled with it. And I think when things are like performance based or things feel like it's like a meritocracy, which like things definitely are, it just kind of gets ingrained. And like, I also think if you grow up and you get rewarded for like accomplishing things, it like, that's a nice feeling. So then like you kind of link these things like together. And I think it can get a little clouded. And it's usually not until like things don't go your way, like from a grade standpoint, let's say you're getting like straight A's, it's probably not until you like fail that first test sometimes that you're like, huh, like, okay, am I tying too much of my personality with like what I'm accomplishing and things like that. And I had a friend, I mean, friend's dad, it was like the first injury I had, first major injury after my freshman year. And I think I might have said this on your podcast, but he was like, running is what you do. It's not like who you are. But I think we can get like our identity can get, heavily tied to what we're doing, whether it's running, school, you name it. So, I don't know. I feel like this question, because I don't have like an answer that first came to head, it's definitely made me like ramble on different topics. But I
It's all
just
good
think, I
stuff.
mean, I would agree. I think we are, I don't know, like, if there's one reason why we're hard on ourselves, but I think, we definitely are. And so I think there's a balance of, you know, giving yourself grace. And yeah, I would just say I think the pursuit of your best does not mean the pursuit of perfection, but yeah, I think those can get intertwined and mixed up and things like that.
You mentioned doing things for the praise of other people, people falling into that trap. And I think a lot of people fall into this trap throughout all their lives of living a life that they expect others that they expect. We're getting into deep subjects here, so I'm trying to figure out the wording here. But a life that they live a life that they think other people expect them to live, and therefore all their actions they try to line them up with the expectations of other people, and they're rarely doing things for their own personal gain. I think I see this a
Hmm.
lot in high school with teammates or just like knowing people now where even high level NCAA runners, it was like a dad's dream and he never did it. And the kids doing it because it was their dad's dream and he couldn't do it. And I think it's just a pretty sad and miserable way to live your life if you're only doing things because other people expect you to do it. What's been your process of making your running your own pursuit? Obviously, you are doing it for bigger causes than yourself, as you should,
Hmm.
but making sure that your actions are lined up with what you actually want out of your life.
Well, I think I mean, when you're growing up, you're just kind of probably trying to form your identity. And so it's very easy, I think, to just kind of link like praise or success like together. Like I'm sure there, because, and those things are all like tied together, right? Because like I think I'd be lying if I said like part of my joy from running didn't stem from being successful in it. Like I think like those things can feed into each other. You just want to, I think it's like, am I only doing this because like of the success or praise or whatever I'm getting as I'm growing up doing it? And I, I loved sports growing up, played a lot of different sports with, uh, you know, whether it's soccer, basketball, like a lot of friends, we just all grew up playing sports. And I think like that never really felt, I guess, like forced on me. And I think I always just felt a certain love and enjoyment from like watching or playing sports, even like the sports video games. So I think like just being like intertwined with sports, that just never felt like a no brainer for me. I think I was fortunate that even though I knew my parents and my like extended family had a history in running, it didn't feel like something I was like forced into. It was just like, hey, why don't you like try it? And the decision in high school to go all in on running was something, a decision like I was free to make on my own. And I think that, I would say my parents and like my dad have always had high expectations for what I'm capable of achieving. But I think like that I was always given the runway to, pursue that path, like if I wanted to, but I didn't have to. Um, and I don't know. I think running, especially, when you're, as I got older in college, you start to experience like these bigger meets where you're traveling to other states, you're getting flown across the country. You're like, oh, this is super cool. You're getting to experience new things with different people. And I think running has opened a lot of doors for me, whether it was where I went to school, places I'm able to travel and things like that. So I think for me, it's just as I've gotten older, I think it's just always like felt right. And I think it's a little easier as you get older, not always, to like have a better idea of like who you are, what's your identity like and things like that. And I think running has just always felt like it fits into the picture of who I believe that I am. And that it's never felt like something I'm kind of like jamming just to make it work because like it's gone well or because people like that I can give them some Nike gear here and there. It's, it's always just felt like just a piece of who I am. And, it's what I do and things like that. So I don't really know if that's a full answer, but it's just, I think I've been fortunate that it's never felt like something I'm forcing. But I think as you develop a better sense of who you are, you kind of realize like, okay, there are different things that I've been doing in the past that don't actually like line up with who I think I am.
Going back to the point of humans being hard on themselves, I think a lot of people, and you might have insight here from working with a sports psych, are just like their minds. We live in our minds. It's a weird kind of concept, but it's true. Like we just have
Hmm.
these thoughts that happen 24/7. Sometimes we act on them, sometimes we don't. It's kind of this limbo. And there's this great quote I love, came across in a podcast, and I think the original person who said the quote was Mark Manson. He said, "The person you have to spend the most time with listening, excuse me, the person you have to spend the most time listening to in your life is yourself. Try not to lose their respect." And the person in the podcast went on to talk about, like, if you say you're going to go to the gym, but then you don't go to the gym and you can't hold those promises to yourself, how in the world do you think you're going to maintain your self-respect if you always make these promises, but you always fall short? What's your
Hmm.
general take on building up that respect and trust for yourself? And I think this is something that doesn't get talked about enough because we think, I might think, how do I build Sean McGorty's trust, right, as Dominic Schluter?
Yeah.
But I rarely think, how do I build my own trust in my head and build my own respect for myself? And I think once you build that respect and that trust with yourself, as weird as it is to say, you live more confidently, you live more freely, you find more fulfillment within that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think when you were saying all that, the first thing that kind of popped into my mind was a conversation I'd had with my sports psych about like my bias typically, if there was two, it's like, is your bias to do too little or is your bias to do too much? Like I'd say most athletes is probably going to be more on like the too much thing. But basically, like going back to your point, it's like, okay, I'm probably not trusting myself that like it's basically like, oh, I need to do like more, especially I think some of that stemmed from like having to come back from injury or things like that. And I think like being able to kind of finish the day and be like, okay, I did like everything I needed to do today and feel good about that, probably stems from that trust in yourself and things like that. So I think it's something you have to be purposeful with. I think it probably comes more naturally for some people than others. I think like specifically in the running sense, like you almost have to like not let the desire to accomplish certain things or like you're just like, oh, it's like I really want to see like what my best can be. I think some of that can be fueled through comparison as well. It's like if this worked for this person, well, like then like would it work for me too? Things like that. I think owning like your own journey is hard, especially if like you look at other people's journeys and I would say on the surface it doesn't look as like hard as other people's, which like I think is an easy trap to fall into. But there are always more hardships I think than you see. And like you said, because you're not in that person's head, you have no idea the conversations that are going on there. And I don't know. I think sometimes when you look at high school runners, college runners, new pros, and they're going through certain things, you almost wish you could like help them fast forward, but like and just like have learned what they need to learn to like help them in that situation. But I think through that trust, a lot of it is based on experience, and sometimes you can't rush time, and it's just like some people it'll take a little more time than others to learn and develop. But I think from that trust standpoint, we're kind of talking that kind of goes back to that like are you finishing a race and knowing that you gave it your all? Like if you're having honest conversations or if I like lied to myself in 2021 and I was like, no, that was the best you had, like then I'm just creating this inner dialogue where okay, like I can't actually trust what I'm telling myself because I'm just trying to make myself feel better in the moment. So I think yeah, how you talk to yourself and what you're saying goes a very long way. And I mean, like you said, it's the person we talk to the most. So hopefully you're truthful, and hopefully you're not being overly harsh. Get a little kindness in there, and yeah.
Speaking to the aspect you said a minute ago of like wishing, you could make some people fast forward through those periods, something to that extent.
Hmm.
There was this concept I came across last year, which I think is phenomenal. And the speaker was going, if you were to build a human, what would you put them through to make them the human you would ultimately want them to be? It's a great reframing because I think we want, I want patience. I want to work on delayed gratification. But then you break down delayed gratification and patience. And what it takes to get those things is not having things handed to you right away. and it's a
Hmm.
complete reframing. Or like, what's another thing? I don't know, consistency. Like, in order to get good at consistency, you can't see results right away. You kind of need to work through the labor for a while before seeing
Yeah.
those results to become someone who's a consistent person. If you want to become a nicer person, you probably are. You probably should have some mean people in your interactions throughout your week to test that kindness and to work on that kindness and to work on being selfless. But yet we think, oh, I want to be kind and be a kind person, but yet never have mean or rude people. It's like it doesn't work like that. The things
Hmm.
we want to get require the opposite to get those things. And so I think it's a good reframing for the listener of like, if you pray for patience, you better believe that obstacles are going to be thrown your way. Hopefully not like 7 major injuries like Sean McGorty, but something along those lines.
No, I mean, I think I would say adversity is typically how you learn like a lot of valuable lessons. I think it can be hard to, it's not hard to maybe like learn about something new when everything's going well, but I think it's hard to like maybe fully like buy in and change it sometimes because it's like, well, like if what I'm doing right now is working, like why would I need to change and things like that. And or like you said, you might think you're patient, you might think you're XYZ, but it's usually adversity will kind of put that to the test, and then it gives you a chance to kind of step back and be like, oh, okay, so like, on a small scale, maybe it was like, okay, when that person said something mean to me, I immediately like snapped back, and so it's like, okay, maybe I need to, that was a quick exposure of like, okay, maybe I'm not where I think I am with, my ability to kind of just take things in stride, or whether it's like an injury and it's like, okay, like how am I handling this period of not being able to do the, choice of exercise that I'd like to be doing in this particular moment, or how am I doing with actually just having to like be still. Like I think that's I think just hard in general now, probably especially with phones and everything. And now I'm sounding old and like a veteran, like you said, but
Bring the
I
wisdom,
think just
Sean.
like,
Bring it.
yeah, being still. It's like, okay, am I able to do that and things like that. I just think a lot of things end up coming out of adversity, and ideally you have the support to go through it, because I think it's obviously very hard if you're just always going through adversity alone. But I think that's, at least from my personal experience, where I've probably found the biggest moments of growth from my character and like who I am as a person and things like that. And then that's translated into running, but it's also translated just into general life.
Let's go way back to what we were talking about 5 questions ago. Your 2024 season. I love it. You were the sports psych today for the listener. Um, let's talk about this injury. So you mentioned you had a good fall, and then winter this hiccup pops up. Take me through
Hmm.
kind of the 24 season as much as you can, without getting too into the weeds. The general overview of fall training, injury, and the road back to the trials.
Yeah. So heading into the fall, had just come off of Budapest. We had some conversations with Jerry, just about what things were going to look like moving forward. I was very excited, very motivated to, be like just do things to work towards making the Olympic team. And heading into the fall, Jerry wanted to implement a new workout cycle, which I was super excited about. We were going to start to do some double workouts here and there. Not like always your classic double T that you hear about. I feel like calling them double workouts is probably much more accurate. And we had like this cycle in the fall, which was new but exciting. And then from last year, I was like, okay, like you got hurt after last fall. Let's try and introduce some down weeks here and there. And, things were feeling good. And I thought I had adjusted my training properly, also from like a mileage standpoint, that I was kind of, I felt good about the changes I'd made. And we go into like December, and right before we go home for the holidays, I started to have like a little bit of discomfort in my like lower back, right in the sacrum area. So immediately I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like after last year, do I have another sacral? But thankfully that was all fine. I don't know if something was jammed or what. It just took a little time to figure itself out. But while I was at home working out, I like tweaked my right calf doing this workout, and it's like kind of fine, but by the time I get back to Oregon, like we're doing a double workout, and the second one I need to stop early. I'm like, I just need to give this a couple of days to calm down. Go to run after those few days, and I'm like, okay, now why does my like left shin bother me? So it just kind of felt like these little maybe warning signs or little niggles have like popped up and bouncing around my body. And so I run twice on the weekend, and I'm just like, okay, my left shin's like a little weird, but that discomfort in like my sacrum or lower area was still there. So I was like, in case this is a bone injury, I'm just going to give it 5 days. And this is like right before we're going to go to Flagstaff. So I'm like, I get MRIs or X-rays on my tibia and sacrum, and then I get an MRI on my sacrum, and everything from that comes back clear. And at this point, after taking 5 days off, I'm feeling good. So we fly up to camp. I'm like, I feel like I'm ready to run. I run the first day of camp with the guys, and I'm like, it feels like my shin is like broken. And that run was like very painful, but muscle through like 35 minutes. And then like the rest of the day, I'm like, okay, now it definitely feels like there's like swelling down there. But naturally, go for a 10-minute, or I start the run the next day. Like within 3 minutes, I think I'd like dropped off the guys. I made it like 10 minutes, and I was like, okay, it feels like my shin's like broken. And I don't know. It was super weird to me because I was like, I was taking off time, and this was getting worse. And it ended up being I don't know if it ever turned into a fracture, but at least when we got the MRI, it was a grade 3 stress reaction in my tibia. And it was a large amount. I think it was like over 11 centimeters long, like maybe 14 centimeters long. And um, that started my, comeback as we've talked about, had to put on the cape again. And, in the moment, obviously was down. I mean, it's hard not to be when you get hurt, but at the same time, I was like, okay, it's January. It's not like this is April or May. Like I'm still going to be able to race at the trials. And I think a benefit of last year in 2023 was like, okay, you've gotten a bone injury in the winter and you've still made a team. So like this is something you can do. This isn't something new. And just embrace and attack the cross training in Flagstaff. Ended up having to take like 6 weeks fully off of no running, and then was able to start gradually building back up on the Alter G. And so I think I finished Flagstaff camp starting on the Alter G, and then we were able to start building. I don't remember exactly when I first started to work out again. It either would have been like at the end of March at the earliest, or like early April, and from there it was just trying to catch back up. And early May, I ran a portion of I think it was the Oregon Twilight meet. Some of the guys were going to try and run like closer to the standard. Unfortunately, the weather turned out to be absolutely terrible. But for me, a big thing was just like, okay, you're going to tuck in, and we're just going to like see how long you can go. Like you don't need to go the full race. I think 4K was like the longest we would go. And going into that, my big thing was like, when it gets hard, embrace it and know that you can go like at least another 400 longer than you think you can. And
Also,
so
for
like
context, this
yeah.
was like the worst weather of all time. This was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a
I don't know.
hurricane.
I mean, it was miserable. I'm
Sorry to
we were
interrupt.
like,
I just wanted to put
no,
that
it's
in
all
there.
good. I just remember
You
when we
came
like
back for the
walked out
worst
from
race.
under, yeah, when we walked out from under Hayward, and I like looked, I was like, I was like, this is terrible. But ran 4K. I mean, it's not like we were running like 13 O's pace at this time. I think it was like 13:20 something pace at that point, because I think Charles was one of the few people that like ended up finishing. But I ran like the 4K that I wanted to, and so I was like, okay, like that's a good step forward. At that point, I think in May, and then maybe it was the next week, did a workout with Mo, and I was like, okay, I'm starting to feel like myself again. And we go up to Park City. We ended up making the decision not to race. Like we were debating about a 1500 before altitude, but we hadn't before, USA's in 2023. And so I think we felt okay that I could be ready for the Olympic trials. And again, it was a good camp. I guess in 2023, I felt like that was like maybe the best camp I'd had. I don't know if I'd say this was like the best camp I had, but it was a good camp, and I felt good going into the trials and good about my fitness. And, Jerry felt like I could make the team. I just think, I don't know, whether it was I needed a little more time, or just some of the training just was put in. I just maybe needed time for it to be absorbed. It wasn't able to come together, but thankfully was there. I ended up racing, just kind of, I guess, continuing the 2024 summary. Ended up like racing a week later in Paris and ran a 3K PB, and then flew back and ran a 1500 in Memphis and ran a 1500 PB, and then went back to Europe and ran a 3K in London and ran another PB. I stayed over in London for a few days to do a 1500. Did not run a PB there because I was toasted still from that 3K. Came back to the US, ran a PB in the mile at the Sir Walter Miler in North Carolina, and then had a little bit of a training block. Went over to Silesia, did not beat Jakob in the 3K there. I think that was a good lesson learned of like timing of travel, maybe still being in your legs. That was a rough one. Made me wonder if my legs were cooked for the season, but we felt, I think I kind of was like, okay, I think this is more of a one-off. Stayed over a little longer, ended with a second place finish in Rovereto in the 3K to end the year. So I think I think it was like 7 times after, and I've never actually fully like experienced kind of a summer racing season like that. Just from, in 2023, because I was happy to make the team, but like that kind of dictated that there was a lot more training instead of, for a period I was racing like almost every week. And, I definitely am appreciative that I was able to use the fitness that I had worked to build, and run some PBs. My first time competing in Diamond Leagues. That was just super awesome to experience. I think the London Diamond League had like 50 or 60,000 people there. And that was just, that's the most amount of people I've ever raced in front of. So there were a lot of, new experiences and things that I like really value and appreciate from this year. Is it unfortunate that I can't say I'm an Olympian after this year? Absolutely. But I am grateful for the things I was able to accomplish, I was able to experience, and for the growth that definitely showed throughout the year.
Now, in this kind of period where you're starting to build back up again, looking to the 2025 season, hopeful of the World Championships in Tokyo, and I'm sure that would be icing on the cake a little bit as you missed the Olympics in Tokyo, and we've discussed that in this podcast, but also other podcasts. What are some things or conversations you've had with Jerry or Alex in terms of, I'm sure you've had maybe you can speak to this, had this conversation every fall of like, how do we avoid the injuries, but what's at this time around, and what's kind of the plan to see a full healthy Sean McGorty? Because gosh, when that happens, my bank account is being fully depleted buying Sean McGorty stock. When I hear he's had a full fall, winter, and spring, he's going to be a scary man in Eugene.
I appreciate it. I think, so my kind of reflection, like, I think I said this earlier in the podcast, was, okay, going into this year, I want to work smarter, not harder. I think that after 22, it was like, okay, like this is where Grant and Mo are at. Like, from a mileage standpoint, they were running more than me at the time. And I was like, okay, I want to like kind of close that gap and things like that. So that would maybe be an example of working harder. But, I think the consistency piece for me has just always been something that I'm like, if you give yourself that time, you've been able to accomplish like what you believe you're capable of doing. So, typically, Jerry and I were reflecting on all the different races. And I think a big piece for those was like, okay, I got a lot of good racing experience that honestly from some of the other years I've been missing. So we feel good about that. I think, he's been thinking through a lot of like, from a training standpoint, this is what we did last year. What did he like? What didn't he like? I already know that I think the cycle or the workout structure, things like that will be shifting into the fall. That's normally a conversation I'll have with him once we're back in Eugene. I talked to Alex I think literally yesterday. Yeah. About like kind of this build. And I've been talking to him more like just checking in like weekly on different things as I've been ramping back up. But we kind of like, we're looking through like the whole framework and structure. And he actually texted me this morning and he's like, okay, here's like a rough plan of what it will look like in October, November, December, January. And obviously, like, we'll, you start adding a little more detail, but, I think a great piece that was added to our team when he started joining with us or started working with us was, he's done a ton of research into like the bone science from his own experience. And then just now that he's a coach as well. And I think he knows a lot of, uh, different, like, kind of, he also brings in like a scientific approach to some things. And I just really value, his knowledge and his opinion on things. And that stems from being teammates and to just seeing how he carries himself and like operates. And, he's younger than me, but there's never been like a moment of like, why are you telling me what to do? Like, I like helped recruit him for the job. And so I've like really valued like, that piece and things like that. And I think, um, through those conversations, it's probably just like we've talked about. It's like, okay, like, can you be patient right now? And I've probably been like, if I'm getting the itch of like feeling like I'm ready to do more or want to do more, that's like probably a good sign right now, but like, don't give into that. So, I think a great thing with the off season and kind of just how we kind of operate is that Jerry trusts that, I'll build to a certain point by the time I get back in Eugene. And then we have the certain conversations of how we want to move forward with the workouts and things like that. So I'm very excited for, this upcoming year, as I am every year. But, I'm also excited to the best of my ability to control what I can control and like, okay, like keep the reins on and like ideally you're not missing time in January and February like you have in the past 2 years.
The scary thing too, and you can maybe speak to this, is like you've gotten injured so much and come back so well, and this is why I call you the king of comebacks. That it's almost like no one wants you to get another stress fracture, but if anyone's gonna get a stress fracture and be fine, it's you. So it's
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it's like I remember I definitely like if I can like semi-retire, the nickname, it's like that's a good thing. But at the same time, like, I do think I have a certain like amount of confidence that if there's a hiccup or things like that, I can, bounce back from it. Obviously, it didn't like end in the storybook ending that you hope it to this year, but yeah, I think through those different like times of adversity, like we've kind of talked about, I've learned about how to navigate those and still stay confident. So I'd say like as a whole, looking at this year, I'm very pleased at where I was able to keep myself like from a mental standpoint and things like that. And I think I was able to, see that there's been a lot of growth there. And so now it's like, okay, that's there. You stay physically healthy, you combine them together, and ideally you can work towards, making another team, racing at the level you want to race, competing for a national title, setting PBs, things like that. So I think I'm just excited to keep racing too, because I mean, getting to race, like I said, those 7 different races, that's just like I love training, but the racing is, I mean, that's the fun part. So it's nice to not miss that.
the celebration of all the hard work. Well, you've got
Mm-hmm.
swagger, as the kids say. You've got aura, the way you come back and just dominate. So you did answer this a little bit in your previous response about Alex, but talking specifically about Alex because I know he'll listen to this one. Hi, Alex, wherever you are listening to this podcast. And again, you kind of answered this for me, but I'll ask it to you anyway. Shot to the ego. You were a team captain on Stanford. Youngin Alex Osberg comes on the team. You flip the roles couple years later. Now he's coaching you. Youngin, I mean, youngest. I mean, what he's done is remarkable at his age, but it's unheard of to get this role, and he deserves it in every single way. But how funny is it to see the tables turned? Alex Osberg makes some history, and coaches his old former teammate.
Oh, I wouldn't want it any other way. I mean, especially like I mean, I thought he would be fantastic for the role, and I just think now, like reflecting, that's another thing you reflect on at the end of the year, and I just think I'm super appreciative. I think I speak for the rest of my teammates that we were all super appreciative, and I think he was very purposeful of like getting to know each person, and I think trying to figure out how he could be the most effective for them individually. And I think he built trust with everyone very quickly, and that goes a long way. And um, just specifically on like I very much like trust his opinion. Like it's very easy for me to ask for his advice and different things like that, and not then overthink it or feel like it's like not what I should be doing. And like I just know that he genuinely like wants me to be the best that I can be. And I don't know where his coaching journey will take him. I think, as you know, from your friendship and relationship with him, he could be successful in a lot of different things. But I do think, you know, as a coach, and he's young, but I think will continue to learn and develop. I think wherever that journey takes him, he could have a great, system, team, culture around him. And, we're all very appreciative for the work. I'm definitely appreciative. And, I also got another friend with me out in Eugene, so that was a win for me. So, yeah, I mean, it's been all good for me, 10 out of 10. So
That guy's 101. I do want to say he did coach me before he coached you, which is quite the flex, because he coached me for my
yeah,
first
you laid the
marathon last
groundwork.
year.
You laid the groundwork.
I really did. I really did. Shout out Alex, the absolute man. And it was funny because I've experienced this in my own right, being coached by him, but also being friends with him. He's just a whiz when it comes to the science. Like, gosh, in high school, I think my Achilles tendon was hurting. He was like, "Here's this study I did while at Stanford,
Yeah.
showing the effects of collagen and its healing effects on your tendon. And here's this long study and yada yada yada." And you read through it and you're like, "Who is this guy?" And then last year, when I got injured during my marathon build, and we were questioning how it was affecting my race fitness and my ability to break 3, he like did this whole research and study into how much VO2 max declines on a week by week basis. And it's just like, this man goes above and beyond with anything he does. And that's Alex Osberg in a nutshell. Wrapping up this conversation, Sean, two questions for you. One serious, one fun. Serious question: what would success look like to you for 2025? How would you define it in 2025? What would you have to do to sit on this podcast a year from now and be like, that was a successful year?
It would be naive to say that it would look like a year where I was completely healthy, because I do think at some point some things are out of control. But I think success for me in 2025 will be, no matter who. So when I line up to race, no matter who's in the race, no matter like what they've run, things like that, running the race I believe is the best race for myself to succeed. I think that would play into it. I think just, is it going to happen every single day? No. Like we were talking about, like that piece of perfection. But are you spending the majority of your days going to bed believing and trusting that I did the best I could do that day? Whether that's an off day, whether that's a long run workout, whatever. And then, yeah, just did I continue to pursue and own my own running journey, and continuing to work on not making comparisons to others, whether it's from a training standpoint, races standpoint, timing standpoint, all those things. So I just think owning my journey in 2025 and everything that comes along with it, and hopefully I hope that it is not a year that we just talk in general, but hopefully in a year when we talk and reflect, I'm able to say that, yeah, I feel like I did a good job with all that.
Sean, final question for you. We are officially in fall. What is your favorite part about fall? It could be music, vibes, football. Give it to me. Sean McGorty's take on fall.
It's got to be.
Is it the best season?
It's probably got to be football. I mean, I love football. Whether it's fantasy, I mean,
QB1?
I love getting my heart broken from football. Believing that, it's going to be my year in fantasy, or believing that, yeah, I know which way to pick against the spread. So that's just a piece I like really love. Is it the best season? I mean, in my opinion, no. I love being tanned, and I just love the summer. But Um, and I mean, there's a lot of great holidays that kind of come around in the fall. I like when the leaves change, but I don't know. Yeah, I love football.
Real quickly, you're like 6'5". Was football ever in your? You maybe played in the past, but at what point did you realize you weren't going to make it to the NFL? Slash, how far did you get in that pursuit? Because you're pretty built for a runner, and you definitely have the height. Seeing guys like, the small guys in the NFL, quite frankly, Hurts,
Yeah.
Bryce Young, Jaden McDaniels, you're taller than them all. Was Sean McGorty ever going to be QB1?
Unfortunately, I never even pursued that route, so it never even started my
TBD
journey to
in
the
another
NFL.
life.
But my youngest brother, who's actually 6'5", he played, I think, like for 1 year in sixth grade, one season. And I mean, poor guy. So obviously he's tall. So they like put him with like the middle schoolers at this point who just like are maybe like the same, like, I don't even know weight class because these guys are just way more built. And because he's tall, they put him on the offensive line instead of like everything,
Oh no.
like any fun positions. But he did get to play running back twice. And I kid you not, he fumbled literally back to back plays. The first time I think he recovered, the second one he did not recover, and he never played running back again. So my dad played growing up, and he loved it. He played on offense and defense. So, I'd like to, in like a different world, it would have been fun to see like what I maybe could have done if I like solely focused on football. But I mean, they're such incredible athletes. So, like, who knows? But I mean, I'd like to. I don't know. I think it'd be fun to be a wide receiver. That would probably be where I'd put myself. I don't know about QB1, so who knows?
I did just fact check myself on Wikipedia. Your height is listed. That is quite the flex. That's aura right there. 6'4",
I know,
193
but
centimeters.
I'm
Is that
not
true?
trying to take away from
193
it. No,
centimeters?
I'm not 6'4". I don't know. My brother
No.
literally. It's funny you said that. Like literally 2 days ago, he's like, "You're not 6'4".
How
So
tall are you?
I'm like, if you round up 6'3", but like six
No
two
way. We're
and
the same
something.
height. There's no way. You look so much
I don't
taller than
know.
me.
Well, hey, maybe I mean, I appreciate that. I like that I can come off as tall.
Are
We'll
you
find
serious? You
next
look
time we get a
so
photo, we'll know.
tall. Because
I
that
mean,
funny thing, we might be the exact same height. Because I'm 6'2". If you round up, I'm definitely 6'3".
yeah. So
So
I mean, I'm
I'll have to
over
ask
six
Alex because
two.
he's seen
I'm
both of
over
us.
6'2". I'm just not 6'3". But
Literally the
um,
same exact thing. Well,
it's a
shout out
bummer.
whoever wrote that on Wikipedia, gassing Sean
I
up.
mean, I appreciate it. It's nice of them, and I don't know. I'm sure there's been some pictures from like some races. I like look and I'm like, I think I look like I'm a head taller than everyone. But
You do.
yeah,
That's why I thought 6'5". But
yeah.
anyways, Sean, you're the man. Always appreciate these deep conversations with you, and looking forward to more to come in the future, and praying for a healthy, successful year
Thank
for
you.
you. And
Thank
always
you.
appreciate you taking the time to share so much wisdom with this community.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I've loved keeping up with what you're doing, and you've had some fantastic podcasts and guests. So keep doing your thing.